Is Jesper Storgaard Jensen, and if you've been reading PRIMO and you've been viewing PRIMO on our website also, you'll see his byline often. Jesper has been writing for us for many years now. He covers all areas of Italy. He's a wonderful writer. He's a wonderful photographer, and above all else, he has that journalistic instinct where he just knows a good story, and he's able to convey that to us. In the most recent edition, he's featuring an article on the pilgrimage sites for Roman Catholics who come to Rome, a number of churches on the outskirts of the city, and he conveys the journey that people can take to visit these various religious sites and landmarks. And Rome is his, now I guess it's his hometown, and he's written a very interesting book called The Invisible Rome. And he puts all of his talents to good use. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to talk to him today about his new book, The Invisible Rome. Jesper, it's a very interesting title. What made you come up with that title?
Well, first of all, thank you for this invitation. I'm quite happy to be here with you today. I just wanted to show you the book. It looks like this. I hope you can see it.
Yeah, I'm going to show an image of it also. And you took that photograph, correct? Yeah,
that's right. It's right now it's written in Danish, of course, and I'm trying to find out if it would be possible to find editors in other countries. But first and foremost, it's a book speaking about the Rome that tourists and travelers don't see when they go to Rome, because Rome is a huge city of 1,290 square miles. It's one of the biggest cities in Europe. And as we know, mostly tourists, when they go to Rome, they stick to the so-called historical center, which is just a very small part of Rome. It's 20 square kilometers. So there is a big Rome and there's a small Rome, and I have tried to find stories about the whole Rome, which I find personally very interesting to speak about. It could be, for example, just to give you an example, stories about personalities and events and attractions along the Tiber River. The Tiber River is very often regarded as, well, it's just a river.
Yeah.
And who cares? But if you did not have the Tiber, you wouldn't have Rome. So you could say that the Tiber is, in a certain way, the blood that runs in the veins of Rome. To use a dramatical expression. And the Tiber River has so many stories to it. There's so many stories to tell about when you speak about the Tiber River.
Give us an example of one of your stories about the Tiber River that you share in the book.
Yeah, for example, each year on the 1st of January, there's a very peculiar guy who is called Mr. OK.
Yeah.
And for the past 30 years, he has been jumping off a bridge in the center of Rome on the 1st of January, where it's quite cold in Rome. He's been jumping off to make the sort of an inauguration jump into the new year. And this has become quite an attraction, and you would see very often, you would see people, about 2,000, 3,000 people going to the Tiber River to see this guy jumping off the bridge. He is now something like 68 years old, so he's not a youngster. And when I first time heard about him, I thought this is a fantastic story. So I decided to try to track him down and find out if I could make an interview with him.
Right.
And I managed to find him, and I made an interview with him, which was very, very interesting to hear his story about this very crazy jump. that's just one example of some of the stories that you find along the river.
Why does Mr. OK jump in the? What's his reason for it?
Yeah, before him there has been another 2 or 3 persons, and you know, he's one of these personalities where you think, why does he do things? And he was attracted to the first person making this jump, and he was a guy from Belgium who jumped off the bridge with a high hat, and that was the first time ever that the Romans had seen a person jumping off a bridge on the 1st of January in Rome. So he, to sort of secure people that he was okay, he made this famous gesture, which means it's okay, and he was therefore named Mr. Okay. So the present jumper, who's called Palmulli for surname, he got to know him, and he thought, I'm going to do the same thing because I find this jump very fascinating. Mm. So he's been doing that for the past something like 30 years.
I see. And people just show up, I guess, to see if he's going to make it. I mean, it must be a very dangerous jump for him, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he told me when we spoke together, he told me that he has seen some of the programs of the tourists on, and very often on the 1st of January, in the programs that are written at 10 o'clock in the morning, we go to see the Pope. At 12 o'clock, we go to see Mr. OK jumping off the bridge.
To see a miracle, I guess, or whatever.
It is actually, yeah. Right. And he was taken into the Oscar-winning movie of Paolo Sorrentino. He has a very, very small role where he jumps off the bridge, and you see him in just something like 10 seconds.
Oh yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I recall that scene. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very short.
Right. Well, you write about another in your book. You have a whole list of chapters there, and let me just ask you real quick though. How long have you lived in Rome and Italy?
I've lived in Rome for the past 25 years.
I see.
It's actually the town where I have lived the longest in my life.
How about that? Well, yeah. Now you came originally from Denmark.
Yes.
What brought you to Italy originally? Why did you leave Denmark to Italy?
I went to Italy because I have a background as a translator and an interpreter between Danish and Italian. Hmm. So I went to Rome to work at the Danish embassy, which I did for about 11 years, where I first and foremost dealt with the Italian economic situation and the political situation.
I see. And then you went into journalism, I guess, after that, or
exactly, yeah, exactly. After 11 years, I needed to try something new, and I've been doing quite a lot of writing in my spare time. So I decided to quit the embassy and to start being freelance.
Well, what made you stay? I mean, I guess the job was one reason why you stayed in Italy, but what did you just like it here, where you're at in Italy?
Well, apart from the professional side of my life, I have also married an Italian woman, and we have 2 children. And as you know, when you make family, the roots become more solid.
Very true. What's it like? You know, so many people who visit Rome. When we visit there, we visit the. It's one of the most popular tourist sites in the world. I live here in Washington D.C. It's the same experience. I think people come, they see the landmarks, the sites, and everything else, but they always ask me, "What's it like to live there?" Because you know, and so I guess the question to you, I think, is appropriate. What's it like to actually live in Rome? What do you like most about it?
That's a very good question, and it's a bit difficult to give a short answer.
Right.
But I'll try.
Okay.
It's if you could perhaps make a comparison. I have been to New York once, and I think that was an incredible place to be.
Right.
Incredible place to be. I was so I was so fascinated. I was so how do you say, flabbergasted.
Right.
I don't know if you can use that expression.
Of course.
Then sometimes when you happen to actually speak to people living in New York, they say, "Oh my God, that's a nightmare living in New York." And you know, when you come to a place as a tourist, you only see the surface. Rome is a hectic city. Rome is a sort of it's a lazy city. Rome doesn't bother about the future because Rome has a past which has an incredible weight. Rome doesn't have any plans for the future. And that's a problem. That's a problem because when you go out of Rome, if you go to Bologna, if you go especially to Milan, you can feel that there's something different in the air. There's like a bubbling, frizzling atmosphere going towards the future. Rome is a bit, Rome doesn't have any ambitions about the future, and that's a problem because the city is so badly administrated.
And you write about that in your book. I think that's the second chapter that you go into detail about how the title of it is Looking for a Future, and you talk about how badly organized the city is. You talk about how the roads are not maintained. I mean, it sounds like New York, and it sounds like Washington D.C. in many ways, but it just seems like it's just always not managed properly, I guess.
Yeah. The problem right now with Rome is that for the past 5 years, from 16 to 21, it has been administrated by the 5-star movement.
I see.
And that has been a total disaster. Mm-hmm. It has been a total disaster, and this you can also see on the figures at the latest elections in spring 2018. The 5-star movements had 32% of the votes. If we were to vote tomorrow, they would have 13% of the votes. And that's of course because the electors has found out that they don't manage to offer anything. And they have been in charge in Rome for the past 5 years, and it has been, I'm sorry to say it, but I'm a journalist, so I have to tell the truth. It has been really a disaster.
Well, the 5-star movement, was that the political party that was started by the comedian?
Yes, Grillo. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
And they were kind of outsiders coming in, basically. So they probably
they were outsiders, and they were voted for because they were against the traditional politics. Many voters, many Italians were tired of Berlusconi and the way he was perceiving politics. So that was sort of it should have been a political movement that offered something different, a new life. But as time has passed by, we have found out that they have absolutely nothing to offer. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're outsiders. They probably don't know how it works, the bureaucracy and what's needed to manage things. I'm assuming
they don't. You know, when you have to be a politician, you need to have a certain kind of basic knowledge. And you don't work as a school teacher one day and the day after you work as a politician. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
You can't do like that. And they thought that they could do like that, but they couldn't.
Well, you talk about that, and you talk about the political class in your book. There's another chapter that you devote to your discussion of Rome, and it's just about Rome's political class. And it's interesting, you said that a chapter about one of Rome's most bizarre aspects, its political class, and how the image of a political class is a metaphor of the city. What do you mean by being bizarre? I mean, how's the political class a bizarre class? Explain that to us real quick.
Well, I usually say when I give conferences to different kinds of groups about Italy, that Italy is a fantastic country. It's a fascinating country. When you travel around in Italy, there are so many incredible places to see that you really think this is amazing. This is could it really be the truth? If I have to point out one aspect of Italy, which I regard as being very negative, it should be the political class. For example, right now, I saw last week, I saw an statistic saying how many of the politicians that has been elected to parliament during the past years, how many has taken a jump from the party for which they were elected to another party. And that's something like 300 politicians out of 945 elected politicians. It's almost a third of the whole parliament that has that is now a part of a political party for which they were not elected. And they do it because next time you have seen many politicians from the five-star movement taking a jump to a different party because they know that next time there will be elections, they will get only about 13% of the votes, which means that many of them will lose their seat. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to lose my seat and I'm going to back to do what I did before, as they do in many countries, they choose another party where they have a bigger chance of being elected again to the parliament. So as quite a well-known, how do you say, politologo in Italiano, you say, dealing with the politics, has said that unfortunately, the very first important issue to each Italian politicians is not to solve the problems of the country. It is being re-elected.
Yes.
That's his first thought. He's going to be re-elected. And this is also why, even though Italy has an incredible high state debt, nobody is talking about that we have to introduce new taxes or we have to cut down expenses. Right. Because if you do that, you're not going to be re-elected. And this means that this state debt, which is very, very high, it will continue to rise year after year.
Well, it sounds like the United States. Same thing here. We have the political class, and they just they're able to stay in power for various reasons. It could be just the mechanism of how they get elected. It's just where they're from, the geography and other things. They just have a system in place where it's very, very difficult to run against them and defeat them. And I guess the difference between Italy and the United States is we don't have as many people jumping ship. We don't have as many people switching parties per se. Although we have some of that. But it seems to me that in your case, you really have an entrenched political class, and they just want to stay in power, and they don't care the ideology or the philosophy.
Exactly.
It isn't as important as just staying in power.
You actually have some examples of people that has come into parliament representing the extreme left. They have taken one jump towards the center, then they have taken another jump towards the extreme right, and that's what I think is quite bizarre.
Yes. Well, that sounds very bizarre. And I'm sure the politicians, when you bring it up to them, they probably say, they're growing in their political.
Oh yeah, of course. They have many excuses. Definitely.
Yeah. I think you and I are alike in some ways, because I live here in Washington, D.C. And so you just become, it's natural for you to be an observer of politics. You almost become an expert on it without even wanting to be, because you're just surrounded by it so much.
Exactly.
And it must be the same thing with you. You probably see them on the streets, and you see them in the cafes, and they're not as exalted as people may make them out to be in other parts of the country.
Yeah. And that's actually, well, I did not think about that, but it's the truth that when you live in a city where you have the political class, you have this feeling of something mentally heavy. The politics in Rome are very, very present in your life.
Yes.
But when you go out of Rome, if you go to Florence, if you go to Napoli, if you go to Bologna, you feel a sort of lightheartedness that you don't have in Rome.
That's true of every big city, isn't it? It's just where you live in Rome, it's urban, it's densely populated, and you write about that also in your book about how, I mean, you make the one chapter you devoted just to how it is to get around Rome, the roads. You mentioned that there's 8,000 kilometers of roads in Rome. That just seems extraordinary, and it must be. I mean, Rome is famous for it being so hard to get around and to drive and to do everything.
That's a very different. That's a very interesting issue. Speaking about Rome, transportation, traffic, and things like that. I sometimes joke when I come back from home, back from work to home. Sometimes I walk. I have from my office to my home. I have something about 5 kilometers, and I sometimes say to my wife when I come home that as a media, when I walk, I during this walk that takes something like 50 minutes, I usually risk my life at least once. So coming back home is actually like a small miracle.
You want to stop by the Vatican before you go on before you go on the journey, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Get help from the Pope. Yeah. Well, I tell that to everybody also here in Washington D.C. I say if you want to get around quick, the most effective and most efficient way really is to walk.
Yeah. Okay.
Because when you drive, you got all the traffic. There's always something going on. There's always construction, and the buses and the trains are notoriously late and poorly managed. But that's just the way it is, I guess.
Yeah. I would say that I prefer to walk or to go by scooter, because the scooter is very smooth and very fast. But of course, you also have to be very careful.
Yes. So you have a Vespa, I'm assuming. You have a
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have a scooter, and I use it quite a lot.
Now you sit here in a chapter. I was speaking about the Vespa. You said that you actually have another chapter in the book where you it looks like director Nanni Moretti, and you follow his path. Or tell us about that. You'd use it says driving through the city on my Vespa. And you mentioned about Nanni Moretti and about how you use the Vespa to get around the city a little bit. What was that about?
Yeah. Well, actually, this was a chapter that came out because I'm a great fan of this film director. He's a typical Roman film director, and I decided that I wanted to use his film from '93 called Caro Diario, where he has 3 different chapters in his film, and in one of these episodes, he drive around on his Vespa. So I thought that to be able to tell about Rome, to tell a piece of Rome, I decided to take the same trip as he did in his film. So I follow in his mechanical footsteps, and I come around and I visit different neighborhoods in Rome, and I tell a story about these neighborhoods.
How about that? Interesting. What kind of neighborhoods? What are some of the unique attributes of some of these neighborhoods?
Well, first and foremost, I go to a neighborhood which is a bit out of the center of Rome. It's called Garbatella. And that's a very, very fascinating place that has a very special story, because in the 1920s, when the fascist party wanted to make these broad alleys in the center of Rome, they tore down a lot of houses, thousands of houses and places where people lived. So these people were forced to go and live elsewhere. So at the time, the Rome's municipality started to construct new neighborhoods outside of the center, and one of these neighborhoods was Garbatella. So it has a very special story, because due to the fact that people were forced to go out there, they, of course, they did not like the fascist party, and this neighborhood has actually stayed a very left-wing neighborhood up till today, which you can see in many ways. And then it has quite a peculiar architecture, which you only find in that neighborhood.
Is that the neighborhood that was the setting for a film with Vincent Price some years back? He was the last man on earth, because it had all this, it was famous for its brutalist style, and there was these modern buildings, and there was an arena there and some other things. I don't know if that's the same neighborhood, but
it could have been that. Yeah, I don't know the film, but it might have been that place, because it has a very, very strange architecture.
Yeah,
it's called Barocco Romano. It means it's a sort of light Baroque style.
I see.
And then the funny thing is that people living here, it's something like 5 kilometers from the center. People living there has a great local pride, and you can actually speak to people that say, "I don't live in Rome, I live in Carpatella."
How about that? That's interesting.
Yeah, even though it is, of course, a part of Rome.
I see. Is Rome a would you were talking about that neighborhood being left wing? Is Rome a left wing city, or is it a right wing city, or what's the ultimate politics of it?
It is quite split between these two political fractions, also in a social way. If you consider the northern part of Rome, you have the right-wing Rome.
How about that?
And if you consider the southern part of Rome, you have the left-wing Rome. And you can also see that if you speak about calcio, about football. If you are right-wing, you are a fan of the team called the Lazio. And if you are left-wing, you tend to be a fan of the team called Roma. And that's very, very tightly divided, you could say.
How about that? It's almost a 50-50 split. You're saying that it's almost a
I wouldn't say 50-50. I would say perhaps 70 left wing and 30 right wing.
I see. Okay.
Right. Yeah, because there are many working class neighborhoods in Rome which are solely left wing.
Probably because union affiliation and some other things probably get them to be that way a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting you mentioned about Nanni Moretti, but you also you wrote an article for us in PRIMO about the celebration of Federico Fellini. And he kind of represents, in my mind at least, he represents Rome in his films, because so many of his films were there, besides his home town of Rimini. And then you also write about the book, however, that this is I didn't know about this until I was reading your description, that this is the 100th anniversary of Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he's also a major figure of Rome. So tell us a little bit about that chapter, about this filmmaker, and if you can also mention anything about Fellini. It was too bad about Fellini because the article he wrote for us was very good, and it was going to be a big celebration for him, but because of COVID-19, it couldn't happen that way, and that was, I think, very unfortunate. Yeah, that was a great shame, because they had planned quite a lot of celebration exhibitions about Fellini, and only a very few were carried out. As regards Pasolini, that's a very interesting character, and also a very surprising character. This year he was celebrated on, I think it was 6th of March. And I have never seen in these years I've been living in Italy, I've never seen so many books being published about one single author to celebrate him. I think something like 20 books have come out in these past months to celebrate Pasolini, and that's quite surprising, due to the fact that Pasolini was not a
popular writer for the people. He was a very difficult writer. He was a very difficult filmmaker. He was a very difficult poet. He was, in a certain way, you could consider him to be part of an elite, a cultural elite. And still, he has been. If I go down on the street and ask 10 Romans, have you read Pasolini? 9 of them would say, no, I don't know anything about him. I only know his name. But he has been extremely celebrated. And the funny thing was that he was born in Bologna, but he lived most of his life in Rome. And he had an incredible knowledge about Rome and about the outskirts of Rome. So I did a bit the same thing as I did to Nanni Moretti. I went in the footsteps of Pasolini to tell my readers, where in Rome can you find, so to speak, the ghost of Pasolini? And then I told about the places he loved in Rome. And I told about his spirit when he described Rome. And the funny thing is that I had a mail from a guy yesterday who told me, I'm going to write an article about your book, and I've been reading about it, and it's very interesting, and it's really you really get under the skin of Rome, and sometimes reading your book really hurts. And I told him, yes, I know it hurts because sometimes the truth can hurt.
Yes.
And Pasolini was famous because it was told that he didn't care about his readers, he didn't care about his publishers, didn't care about anything. He only cared about the truth. So he was a person who had a lot of enemies, because he only wrote the truth when he wrote his books and his articles and he made his films.
Yeah, very interesting. He started out, like you mentioned, he started out as a poet, then he made a number of films.
Yeah.
He made films with Anna Magnani, with Savannah Magnano, a number of people. They tended to be more art house type films, but they're always very good. And then he became, his reputation became quite notorious later on regarding some of the movies that he made. But him being Rome, you have Fellini. That part of Rome is what you go into detail about how. Because when we think of Rome, we think of the political aspects of it, because it's the capital, and then we think of course, the religious component. But a big part of it was the film industry and how many movies being made there. And you wrote an article for us about the famous film studio there at Cinecittà. And so you really, that's a big part of your city, is that the whole film industry and the La Dolce Vita and everything that comes around it. And I guess that's a good segue to another person you wrote about, which was Rino Barillari, and he was the paparazzi photographer. Tell us about that also. That's quite fascinating. You devote a whole chapter to him, and rightly so, I guess.
Well, that was I remember that if you go to YouTube, you can find a lot of interesting stuff. You can, for example, find interviews with the different sorts of writers and authors. And I remember once I heard an interview with the American writer Jonathan Franzen, who was asked what is important when you write. That's a very difficult question. And he said it is important that when your readers read what you have written, they must have a feeling that you have been amused doing what you have done. And I would say in my book, perhaps the chapter that has amused me the most was the chapter I wrote about Rino Barillari, because I went to see him twice, where we were walking during the evening, and we were walking during the night, and he was taking me on to see how he works, how he gets his photographs, and he told me a lot of incredible stories. I was, especially the second time I came back in the middle of the night after having walked with him, and a friend of his, which was a priest, who in about 3 hours said something like 10 words. but he was with us. And when I came back that night, I had my head was completely full of images and persons and stories, and it was so amazing. And that has been very, very amusing, sitting at the computer afterwards and writing on a flow of emotions.
What did he tell you about Rome that you didn't know about? He was he was this famous paparazzi photographer, particularly at the height of the period of La Dolce Vita, and just photographing all kinds of stars who lived here and stuff.
Well, the funny thing is that he has been he started when he was a kid. He came to Rome from Calabria, and he was something like 16 years when he started. And then he learned how to do, and he started to work as an assistant for the famous photographers, and then he started by himself. And of course, at the time back in 1960, when Fellini did his La Dolce Vita, these photographers had to be quite aggressive when they wanted to get the shot, and he was also very aggressive. So he has been. He told me that he had been beaten up something like 78 times. He has gone to the hospital, and he has had more than 100 times where his photographic equipment was smashed. He has been he's been stabbed once. He has been shot at 4 times, and so this is the kind of person where you just have to sit in front of him, ask him a question, and he tells you a number of stories which only he is capable of telling.
Amazing, yes. Now you live in Rome, and when COVID-19 was at its peak, you actually for PRIMO, you actually took a walk around your city, and you took photographs of all the areas, the Trevi Fountain, for instance, a number of places that you went to see some of the famous sites, but just walking along the boulevards and the alleyways. It was all deserted. It was really something out of almost like a science fiction movie. And you wrote about that piece for us, and people can go on our website at PRIMO, at onlineprimo.com, to actually see your work there. And that seems to me that had a profound effect on you. If you can tell us a little bit about that.
First of all, I wanted to thank you, because you were a great part of that story, because I don't know if you remember, but at the time you could not go into the streets of Rome if you didn't have a purpose. So I wrote to you and told you about these restrictions, and you were very kind to send me a letter back written in Italian, which I printed and which I carried with me. And I actually had to show that letter, I think something like 4 times, to the local police, because I was stopped in the streets 4 times.
About that.
So that was a very special situation, to put it mildly. And I don't think it will occur again ever, at least if we don't get another pandemic situation like the one we've just had. So it was, it was just like walking through a ghost town where you know that this town has 2,800,000 inhabitants, but there were nobody to see.
Amazing.
I was at a certain point I came to Piazza del Popolo, and I went up to a place to take some photos, and it was empty. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was totally empty. The same thing in front of Pantheon, the same thing at Piazza Navona. It was totally empty. It was like a ghost town, and that was in a certain way it was very fascinating, but it was also quite scary.
Yeah,
because it gave you the feeling of this, how serious the situation was back in 2020.
Yes. You took a number of photographs in black and white, which was quite startling, because you really saw the texture, of course, of the photographs come out. And that brings to my mind to just the front cover of your book.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. You took that photograph, obviously. Just tell us what that landmark is and what's the.
Yes, I don't know if I should just show it again shortly. I don't know if you can see it here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Since this is a book that is not at all traditional when you speak about Rome and when you speak about Italy, it's quite untraditional because I wanted it to be untraditional. I have also chosen, together with the publishing house, to make a graphic project which is quite untraditional. So you will find many photos in black and white, because I wanted to show like a neorealistic side of Rome, which I very much consider to be how I see the city today. The city, Rome, is not a modern city. It's a city that where millions of people are coming every year to see the city and to live the old Rome, the antique Rome, and so on. But Rome is a city that has something. It's not a modern city, and it has so many problems that it makes me think about the famous period of Italian film, the neorealistic periods in just after the war, in the 50s, where you had all these fantastic films coming out showing Italy after the war. In a certain way, Rome has something neorealistic to it today. And I also wanted to show that both through the things that I write, but also in the graphic project.
What makes it so neorealistic?
The lack of solutions to problems, the uncertainty of how to consider the future. Rome has no intention of looking the future into the eyes. Just like Milan has. Milan has a completely different atmosphere, mentality, approach, and so on. Rome is, as a writer I quote in the book, Rome is a very fascinating city which is not important because it doesn't look towards the future.
Has it always been that way, though? Because when we think of Italy, of course, Italy is famous for its inefficiencies. At least that's the conventional wisdom. We think of Naples and stuff, but was Rome always that way, or since you've been there?
Well, I have to underline once again that I find, of course, Rome a very fascinating city because I've been living here for the past 25 years, and I find it extremely fascinating because all the different neighborhoods of Rome has something different. You only have to move something like 2 or 3 kilometers, then you get to a new neighborhood, and it's completely different from the one that you have just left. And that's very interesting from an anthropological point of view and a social point of view. But if you speak about the future, if you like to have a feeling about an energetic approach towards the future, you shouldn't go to Rome. You should go elsewhere. So of course, it also depends which sort of person you are when you choose to live in a place or a different place. I find Milan very, very fascinating because it has a Middle European spirit. It has a lot of going in the city. Very, very modern, very, this is, in a certain way, this is the real capital. This is the economical capital of Italy, not Rome. But people, of course, many people prefer Rome because it has an incredible atmosphere. It has the old buildings. It has something that no other city has. But it is not a city that looks towards the future, and you have to accept that.
I see. Well, it sounds like it sounds in many ways where I live in Washington, D.C., because we too have neighborhoods, and you're right. It's almost like a small village. You go from one neighborhood to the next, and it's almost like crossing into a village. It's interesting though because you live there, and if people visited Rome, they probably wouldn't be able to notice.
Exactly. No,
you do, and it's really fascinating that you're able to understand it.
They would not be able to notice it because it's traffic and cars and statues and bridges, and it all seems the same, but it's not. There are some certain boundaries, there are some certain limits, and you could see that when Trastevere stops, Testaccio starts, and when Testaccio stops, Ostiense starts, and each neighborhood has its own personality.
You have, I mean, here in the States, we have ethnic neighborhoods. One area might be all Italian, for instance, and you go to another area, it's all Chinese, and you might go to another area, it's all Russian. I'm assuming that's not the way. Does Rome have some of that, or is it just, what distinguishes one neighborhood from the next, if you can give us?
Rome has a neighborhood close to the Stazione Termini, which is the central train station, called Esquilino. And this is a lower class neighborhood. It's left wing, and then it is a neighborhood which is well known because of the huge population of people from China. Oh. Some years ago, you could even see the price tags in the shop windows written in Chinese yen.
So you actually have a Chinatown then, because all the cities we have here have Chinatowns. Washington has a Chinatown.
We have a Chinatown. It's not big, but it's there.
How about that? Interesting.
Definitely, yeah.
I noticed that you have you talk about the homeless problem there, and I guess there's also an influx of migrants from other parts of the world. I know that of course from Africa, but also from Eastern Europe, I guess, there's also an influx of people there. How's Rome affected by all that? Just all the migration and just the changes of demographics and economics and other things.
Yeah, that's a good question, because in Rome, according to official statistics, we have something like between 7,000 and 8,000 homeless people living in the streets. The city has, through different sorts of associations, has a capacity to host something like 2,500 persons each night. And this still means that something about 5,000 people are living in the streets. And of course, that's a problem, especially during the winter time, because it's cold. And very often you can see articles in the local press saying, yesterday night 2 or 3 homeless died due to the cold, and things like that. So just to get back to your question, many of these homeless people are, of course, immigrants. I think something like half of the homeless people in Rome are coming from abroad, and this is a problem because in any kind of city, you should not ignore these problems. This is a problem about social housing. This is a problem about taking care of the most fragile communities of society.
Well, here in Washington, what they've done is they've given out tents to the homeless. So the parks that we have here, you will go there, it's almost like you'll see tents all over. It's almost like a camping.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, and the reason why they did that mostly is because we do have homeless shelters, but apparently they're unsafe and they're unsanitary. So they actually feel it's actually better for the homeless to be in a tent of some sort. And these are the kind of tents you would bring if you wanted to go take a hike to the Alps or something like that. These tents you can put in your backpack and you can put them up or something like that. They're very, and so they give them tents. They also give them a smartphone so they can track them. Wow. Yeah, this is what they do. It's raised some concerns up because the tents are all over the place. Now, when you come here, it's almost like it almost has a sense of chaos to it. But homelessness is a big problem. And for us, it's not so much immigrants. It's mostly drug usage or something of that effect, where the person has some sort of a problem with related to narcotics or
Okay.
something to that effect, you know.
And how many and do you know the number of the
Well, I think
homeless
Washington
persons?
D.C. has about 10,000 of them.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's a
so
lot.
we have a lot. And I think generally speaking, there's probably more homelessness here in the States than maybe perhaps in Italy, I guess.
Yeah,
New York is famous for its homelessness. It's you know, it's quite stark. But
yeah.
this is what they've been doing all throughout here in the United States. You see this in San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's quite extensive, where you see
Exactly, I
almost
know. Yeah,
tons of tents, tons of
yeah,
campsites almost in the middle of in the middle of the city. You know, you'll have tents
yeah.
and everything else. So that's kind of how
It's
they're trying
incredible.
to take care of that problem now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The funny thing is, if you can use the word funny, that in this chapter where I'm dealing with homelessness in Rome, I've been lucky to get an interview with a French guy who has been living on the streets of Rome for the past something like 15 years,
Hmm.
and he has told me how he manages to live and what sort of you could say what sort of tricks he used to be able to live in the streets, and that was a very interesting interview to speak to him and hear his version from the street.
I bet you he sees a lot of interesting things, you know, being where he's at in Rome. I bet you he sees things much more than we do, probably, just generally speaking, where he's at. You know, this is a daily experience.
You see them, you see these persons, you see them quite frequently, I would say. And if you try to notice them, if you don't pretend that they're not there, you will be able to notice them because there are quite a number of them.
They're almost like friends. I mean, I see a gentleman all the time whenever I go to the grocery store, and there's another person I run into, and I talk to them. You get to know them, and we're almost like
Exactly. Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so it's really something.
yeah,
And when it's cold or whatever, we always try to give them a blanket or something like that. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, quite amazing. Well, it's quite a fascinating book, and you go into so much detail, so much detail about the city. We're only covering really a part of it all. And where can people pick up the book? It's not right. Is it available in English right now? What's that all about with regards to language and other things?
Yeah, well, you have to consider that it came out in the beginning of April, so it's completely new, and right now I have done this this very brief description of each chapter, and I'm trying to contact different publishing houses, both in I would like to try to see if I can find some contacts both in the States but also in the UK, to find out if there would be a possibility to make an English-speaking version. But of course, you know, you have to be a bit lucky to find the right person saying, that sounds very interesting.
Well, it would be wise to do it, I think, because you bring in so much information, and you're, like I said, you have just the great qualities of a journalist, and you've been there for so many years. When you're there, when you live in a place for that long, and you're a journalist, you just know so much more about an area than anybody really can apply to it, because you live it. You know, you're there. You just understand it all. That's the name of the game. Yeah.
You have to be a bit. You have to be a bit, how to say, you need to have a knowledge about this sort of a trap that when you live in a place for many years, you start to take some things for granted.
Yes.
And you should not do that. So you have to be very careful with the idea about this is how we do it here, so it's normal. You should never think in that way. You should always ask yourself, okay, we do it in this way, but is it normal?
Yes.
And very often you come to the conclusion that, okay, we've been doing this for the past 20 years in this way, but it's still not normal.
Yes. Well, hopefully this book will probably inspire some people in the political class and just generally in Rome to maybe make the changes that you'd like for them to make. Yeah.
I would say that in the past years there have been a lot of literature about Rome, which has taken a critical point of view. It's not so much the classical tourism books about what to see, where to eat, and things. Of course, you can also find these books, but you have seen a major number of books about Rome, describing Rome with all the social problems.
Yeah, and I can see that, you know, with the rise of the internet and the smartphones and everything else. I think people are looking for something extra, looking for something
Exactly.
to see something different than what they normally
Yeah.
would see on the typical
Yeah.
tourist guide and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I think this is The Invisible Rome is the title of it, and I think it's going to be very appropriate for today's day and age. The way everybody's just traveling all over the place, they're visiting different
Yeah.
places, and you're going to show them a whole different side to the Eternal City. So this is great, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people are very keen on trying to get behind the facade.
Yes, yes. And so many of us share the same problems. It's good that we can maybe exchange ideas and this sort of thing, which you're both do. Well,
Yeah.
Jesper, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. And you're going to be writing for us again. You got all the material you always provide. PRIMO are always excellent. You just have all the great qualities
Thanks.
of a journalist. You know a good story, and you're a great writer, and just a great photographer. And I want to thank you very much. And
Thanks a
The
lot.
Invisible Rome is what it's all about. And just wish you the best in this book, and I'm sure it's going to be a success.
Thank you very much, Truby. Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, and have a great night, and all the best to you and your family.